Thank you, thank you. I am putting myself at great risk here today. I don't have a text. I don't have a slideshow. All I've got is my memory, and there's not as much of that as there used to be. Um, I'm going to talk about good grievance. And this is a nod to good grief, of course. Good grief is something we say when we don't believe what's happened or what someone has said. Good grievance is what we see in contemporary politics. People are just pissed off. So I want to look back on North Dakota history and highlight some of the occasions when grievance was the political sensation of the moment. By way of confession, I grew up in a political family. My parents were nonpartisan leaguers. When the League moved to the Republican Party, my dad went with them, and my mother became a Democratic activist. And so I grew up in a divided home. My parents got along pretty well. They argued on occasion. But my mother particularly, for many years, more than I have been alive, I think, was the Democratic committeewoman for Idaho Township in Montreal County. She is responsible for the elevator in the Montreal County Courthouse in Stanley, because she told the county commissioners before one of the elections in the 1960s, and she was no longer able to walk up the stairs. And she said, I'm a county employee. I need an elevator. And so they put an elevator on the back of the courthouse, preserving the really magnificent front of the Montreal County Courthouse. It's one of the prettiest courthouses in the state. I've been watching politics for a very long time. My Uncle Court, just as a sideline, my Uncle Court is famous in the family for being the man who recorded the coldest temperature ever in North Dakota, 60 degrees below at Partial, which is in Montreal County. He loved to tell the story, of course. He said that he had spit at the ground. And all of my life, I have regretted not saying to him, why, Court, why didn't you pee at the ground? He would have appreciated it. He was the Democratic boss of Montreal County. Any of you know about the history of the western part of the state? There were a lot of Democrats out there at one time. Democrats are scarce there now, but the whole time I was growing up, I don't think there was but one time when a Republican was elected to the legislature from Montreal County. So that's a pretty stellar record when you think about it. But of course they were all old leaguers, and when the League left the Republican column to join the Democrats in 1956, a lot of them went with it. The other thing that happened then that turned North Dakota very sharply to the Democrats was Bill Guy's road building program. Created a lot of jobs, and a lot of those people that were working were voting for Bill Guy. But that's not the first of the episodes that I want to talk about. North Dakota has a really rich political history. Comings and goings and achievements and not. The first presidential election in North Dakota resulted in a three-way tie. Each of the national candidates got one electoral vote. It was apparently a difficult election, 1892. One of the first persons elected to the House of Representatives was a free silver advocate. He was elected as a Republican, of course, because that's what you had to do. A member of the U.S. House from North Dakota, but he was on the free silver side of what was a very important and very hard fought issue in the last decades of the 19th century. The time when William McKinley, whose name you almost don't want to utter now that Donald Trump has embraced him as the best of presidents. The McKinley administration not only favored tariffs, which is what Trump is talking about mostly, but it also aggressively promoted the gold standard. And that was seen as debilitating in all of the Great Plains states. William Jennings Bryan, of course, was from Nebraska, famously said, you cannot crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. That was the great issue of the 1890s. And North Dakota was right there on the free silver side, mostly. But the history of the state has all of these sorts, not ups and downs exactly, but sudden crises where a grievance emerges. Free silver was driven by grievance. The grievance specifically was that farmers and laborers were being discriminated against by the single minded dependence on the gold standard. And that remained an issue into the 20th century. The other kind of grievance that erupted in the early statehood was about elections, specifically gubernatorial elections and senatorial elections. Senators at the time were chosen by the legislature, basically. Popular election of senators was a major issue, again, all through the West, because the outcome of any senatorial vacancy tended to be conservative and almost certainly a Republican in all of the Western states. There was a strong movement for the popular election of senators. Oregon was first, North Dakota was second. So that was a grievance, and a good grievance in that we got real change. The next of these is the one that's most famous, of course, the Nonpartisan League. The Nonpartisan League got its start when a whole bunch of rowdy Scandinavians immigrated to North Dakota, bringing fairly radical ideas with them. So Arthur Clark Townley, who was a kind of a rogue. He's a hard man to pin down, but he made an enormous difference in North Dakota politics. He was a skilled organizer, a good talker, and he knew how much money he could get out of the average farmer. $6. That's what it costs. $6 suckers. And so beginning in 1916, Townley and others, but principally Townley as an organizer, built this political movement which radically changed the structure of government in North Dakota, resulting in, of course, the Bank of North Dakota, which has turned into a truly munificent appendage for the state government. And the state mill and elevator. Also fairly successful, but it's not the billion-dollar enterprise that the state bank is, of course. The state bank benefits from a deal that Bill Langer sort of thought up, which was when the state were stressed breakers. That's why there are several $billion in the state bank. There were a couple of blips along the way. Governor John Burke, elected in 1906, I think, was a progressive and a Democrat. Not the first Democrat elected to the governorship, but the one that lasted the longest until Bill died. He was elected and re-elected twice. 6, 8, and 10, I think. 1906, 8, and 10. He had a what we would think of as a progressive platform. During his time, initiative and referendum were introduced. A number of other constitutional adjustments, including an amendment that brought us very early, among the earliest of the states, to elect senators by popular vote rather than leaving that to the legislature. Because leaving it to the legislature meant that the cement heads would always win. The other really big grievance in early statehood, and the one that lasted the longest, is the one that we rue to this day: prohibition. North Dakota was dry well into the 1920s, and movies were not allowed on Sundays until 1932. Just for your math, that's 43 years, no, 53 years after statehood. So there's a very strong moralistic strain, which erupted again this week in the legislature when the House turned down the casino across the interstate at the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, owned that land, and had intentions of making it the Las Vegas of the Northern Valley, I guess is the way to put it. But it was rejected by the House, again by a coalition of moralists. Yeah, that's not pejorative. I've never spent a nickel in a casino, but I thought it was a good idea Firstly, because it benefits the native population, the Chippewa, the Ojibwa at Turtle Mountain. It brings Canadians to Grand Forks, whom we can tax. It brings money, but it ran afoul of a very strong evangelical. I hate to use that word for them. A very strong group of people who see sin where there isn't any. That's kind of how I see the situation. But of course, there have been these eruptions of morality throughout the state's history. Sunday shopping. Most of us here probably remember the first day that we could go shopping on a Sunday in North Dakota. It's not that long away. Pardon? Or buy a beer. Yes. Somebody who knows this has let us know. That strain, it is a strain of the populism that has blossomed several times in North Dakota. Populism is in the 18th, populism stood for honest government. That's not quite what we think about when we hear populism these days. The other, shall we say, nosebleed in North Dakota politics was Bill Langer. Many of us are old enough to remember Langer in his dotage. He died in 1959, and he had been in the U.S. Senate since I think 38. It would have behooved me to make some cards with these numbers on them, but I think he was initially elected in 1938. Of course, he had been kicked out of the governorship, basically on moral charges. One of the problems with Bill Langer, there were two problems with Bill Langer. One was that he was a German speaker, and he campaigned in German all over the southern and western part of the state. And none of the journalists traveling with him had any idea what he was saying. He was smitten, I guess would be the right word, with Huey Long. He and Huey Long were contemporaries in the governor's mansions in Baton Rouge and Bismarck, and the library at UND has an enormous stack of correspondence between Huey Long and his political machine, and Bill Langer and his political machine. I was quite taken aback discovering that when I was working on the Bank of North Dakota book, because Bill Langer was and still is in many homes regarded as the second coming of Jesus Christ. He was an enormous figure. I'm blanking on his name. Sally Vogel's father, Bob Vogel, who was on the North Dakota Supreme Court, wrote an apologetic biography of Bill Langer. It truly makes him out to be a knight in shining armor. which is simply not the case. Uh, Langer knew how to cut a deal, and he did it in a lot of ways. Um, the most famous, of course, was his cleansing of the faculty at the North Dakota Agricultural College, um, which got the state censored by the American Association of University Professors. UND largely escaped, partly, I think, because Langer had a good time on campus as a student. So these are the kinds of grievances I'm talking about when I say good grievance. You know, it crops up and it goes away. One way to think about this is to apply a big word, atavistic. Atavistic. It means throwback to generations before. And that's what we're seeing now in the rhetoric coming from the Trump administration, particularly from J.D. Vance, who basically told the Europeans to go stub their toes. Speech in where he was, is he brought down the wrath of the German government, basically. So but each of these has a kind of a throwback, looking back at when things seemed to be better. That explains prohibition in a way. You make things better by making people sober. You make things better by letting them be the only social activity you could partake in on a Sunday was church. Hunting was not legal on Sundays in North Dakota until the 1920s. So there's a very strong moralistic trend in North Dakota politics. And of course, we're seeing that again with the legislative opposition to the casino I mentioned just a little while ago. I'm sorry? Well, yeah, well, I think, and I'm not going to hesitate to say this, I think it's a racist vote. The legislature doesn't want the Turtle Mountain tribe prospering on what they see as our prerogatives. But go ahead.
Isn't that the tradition kind of unfortunate moralistic the United States to inhibit and talk reservations? They kind of like it. I point out that the spirit came out publicly against it.
Well, yes, of course. They're the other major casino operator in the state.
Solar energy is another block. Now they're making, there's kind of been this traditional redlining of allowing reservations to engage in free markets. Why would we find that surprising?
Yeah, I don't know that we do find it surprising, but we do find it remarkable. I think we've lost part of our audience now by Okay, I think I'm going to quit. You can suggest something, and I'll tell you what I know about it, and some of what I don't know about it. Just next. Go ahead.
Interesting things about history. Recently, story of we're clearing out. My brothers and I are clearing out the train of law from the old slave. It closed in 2002 for the Congress Center. At the time, it was the oldest law firm in the state of North Dakota that had remained in the state cabinet since 1896. And one of the things I found was Lonsberry's history of North Dakota. You can be familiar with that, very soon. And I have it in my office at the law school. And one of the things I found was there was a great debate when they were organizing the Constitution of the state, whether or not it would be a requirement to be a native born North Dakota to serve on the state Supreme Court. And there's it reads like a deposition. And it's fascinating to go back and see who was debated as they were debating it, how they would arrive at whether or not, because most of the people at the time were immigrants. And there were even fewer of them who were lawyers. So it's a fascinating read. You look at how the state was organized and the issues that they had to deal with. Back in the early 50s, I believe, and was looking for what topics in that period.
The Senate. Senate, yeah.
One great big billboard, campaign poster for him near Bismarck said, "Stick with Langer, he stuck with us." Somebody defaced that sign by saying, "Stick with Langer, he is stuck with us."
That would be, he was elected in 58, that would be 52 then, probably. Yeah, he was still in corpus mentis at that time. By 1958, he was largely not functioning. He was pretty seriously ill. And he was sick. He was sick his whole life. Not directly that I know of. Dr. Eisman, you might be better off here. The question is about McCarthyism in North Dakota. I don't have any reason to think that that he had any profound impact on the state. Certainly, there was the kind of red baiting, I guess is the phrase we use, that McCarthy is widely known for. Milton Young, who was elected to the Senate '44, around there, was friendly with McCarthy. When McCarthy needed to dry out, legend says, I believe this, he invited McCarthy to come to North Dakota to go hunting, and wouldn't allow him. Milton Young was a Mormon and a teetotaler. Wouldn't allow him to drink, and so in a way there was an alliance there that's been written about. But I don't know that McCarthy himself had any other than, obviously he was aware, people were aware of him.
Could you talk about the history of money in North
the history of money. Uh, well, politics is all about money. Uh, a surprisingly large number of bankers have been governor. Uh, I can't rattle them all off, but you're probably 4 or 5 at least. And the only occupation that would have had more governors probably is farmers of some kind or another. We don't tend to elect lawyers. Kelly Armstrong being an exception. And you know, oddly, Kelly Armstrong's profession as a lawyer was used against him during the campaign. So that's another kind of atavistic thing. You know, go get the lawyers. Go get the lawyers. Yes, sir. Well, I was asked the other day what happened to the Democratic Party in North Dakota. And my answer to that question is crop insurance. The Congress, probably 20 years ago or so, abandoned the subsidy system and introduced crop insurance, which favored the larger farmers, whereas subsidies favored the smaller farmers. And so a lot of small farmers disappeared, and so did a lot of Democratic voters. We have to remember that from 1961 until 1993, there was a string of Democratic governors interrupted only once for 4 years by Al Olson. And now, from 1993 to 2025, we have an uninterrupted string of Republicans. And in that time, no Democrat has gotten even close. Well, the first Schaefer election in '92, but that all of that comes together in the '90s when the agricultural programs were changed from less of a subsidy to more of an investment. And that's what happened to small towns too, because they no longer had, as the number of farms dwindled, so did the number of businesses that served farmers. So you know, you could today you could name eliminating the oil counties. You couldn't find more than a half a dozen communities that have more population now than they had in 1960. Now that, you know, the western, 100 miles or so of North Dakota is actually it's a diagonal that goes down pretty much from the Turtle Mountains to the southwestern corner of the state, where oil is north and east of it, or north and west of it rather, and not to the east and south. Yes, Gordon. Yes. Yeah. You did? Wait until you face God. Uh, there's one single really important answer, and it's spelled S-U-G-A-R, sugar. The sugar business was, this is no longer true, but it certainly was true that the sugar business promoted Democratic candidates in all of the sugar states. And of course, North Dakota was and is one of the really big sugar states. So there was lots of money coming into North Dakota from sugar refiners and sugar growers and so on and so forth, because the sugar program aggrandizes American sugar growers in ways that none of the other farm bills do. I mean, we take, of course, we're producing a surplus of wheat, but we do not create a surplus of sugar in the United States. So sugar prices here are kept high to keep farmers growing sugar. Now, there's a threat to sugar, which we're seeing in the Red River Valley now, and that threat is beans and potatoes. Potatoes have been here a very long time, much longer than sugar, but potato acreage is increasing. Corn acres are just volcanic. So sugar is not as secure a crop in the Red River Valley as it once was, and it will be lesser if the federal sugar program is dismantled, which is a big threat actually to the North Dakota economy. I'll get back to you.
I'll defer to the professor.
Okay, he's yielding. Well, the very rapid mechanization of sugar pretty much wiped out the Mexican immigrant population. There's a small but significant immigrant. They shouldn't be called immigrants. Most of them came from South Texas, so they were American citizens. But there's nowhere nearly the kind of temporary labor, traveling labor, that there was into probably about the late 90s, maybe into the early 2000s. So I don't correlate the labor issue with the subsidies, with the sugar program. Yes.
Well, getting back to the casino, it was an ethnic issue that they issue, because I think really the issue was gambling, not the Chippewa, right? If the Chippewa wanted a resort minus the gambling, no opposition.
I don't buy it. I don't buy it.
You think,
No, we allow gambling all over the state. You can walk into a bar in Stanley and gamble if you please.
yeah. Chair,
Yeah. Yes, it is. But the federal government has allowed casinos on native-owned land. The trouble with Turtle Mountain is that it is so goddamn remote. You gotta want to go there. It's wonderful. I love the Peace Gardens. I love the whole difference of it. But it's 3 hours away, and there is no gas station between here and there except in Devil's Lake. so no, I think that there is in North Dakota a resentment toward the Indian population and toward the programs that Indian populations can pursue, including the casino that's in question now.
There was a city council meeting a couple weeks ago when they discussed the casino. One of the citizens got up and made this analogy between Pottersville and Bedford Falls. The movie "It's a Wonderful Life" that they show every Christmas. But the two fictional towns. One had there were gambling saloons and with no civic engagement, and then Bedford Falls, they had an active population. He used that analogy to speak against the casino. So
Speak against the casino. Yeah, I don't think that it's a moral issue. I think it's a racial issue. Well, I grew up in Montreux County. Montreux County is, I think, the only county that has a majority native population other than Sioux County.
Particular dagger in that legislation was a Republican legislator who stood up and said, it's cartel money to bring in.
Yeah.
That one, we could put it in right there.
And-
now she says she's so interested.
And that might be true. I don't know. I'm not in a position to know. I'm sorry?
Say the same about the producers and the IT and the infrastructure. Not all of the money from those machines goes to, there's some that goes to the bar for rent, there's some that goes to the charity, but a large chunk of it goes back to the owners and operators of the machine returns. I mean, so we could in a sense say that's a part of it. So, yeah.
So this is a perfect example of my theory about grievance. Somebody is angry about gambling.
Is a native suspicion of outside forces, whether it was the railroads, it was the grain industry, the banking industry, and it gets to your point of grievance mentality of us as North Dakotans, that maybe we've inherited it from our forebears, but suspicion of anything that we cannot control among ourselves.
I grew up in a home where both the line elevators and the railroads were condemned as thieving outsiders. So yeah, there's a long history of pushing back in Minneapolis. When I went to work at the Forum in Fargo in 1968, I think, I had an internship. And Steve Severson, who was our neighbor, our closest neighbor to the south, down the hill, 2 miles. And I was, during a weekend, I was cultivating a field, and Steve, who was a big, tall guy, came walking across the field, and he stopped me, and he said, "How can you work for that newspaper in Fargo? They're in the pockets of the grain trade." And God bless him, he believed it. But I was happy to take the check because I was on my own by then.
Is it true that it should be because in that case, the morality trumps any religious banner in the state, and yet I think because he was the first,
Um, Oofta, that's a tough one. Uh, well, you know, Harold Schaefer could easily have financed his own campaign. Instead, he financed Robert McCarthy's. I didn't even mention McCartney. He's a character in North Dakota history. Do you have anything to say about that, Mr. Trainer? I don't either.
But it would be the first time. I had something to talk about.
Give me your other example. Okay. I think the better example probably was Nick Spade. A lawyer, isn't that interesting? Any more? Yeah.
One percent of the population has severe gambling problem. 10% alcohol.
Well, that's not a surprise. Ga- ga- gambling, gambling is more expensive than liquor. Now, somebody back here was, no? He always has questions.
Coming so much military installations and so on. Anything more about that?
Well, I don't think that the coming of the military installations had a big influence. They were mostly built during Bill Guy's uh, terms as governor. And by and large, as far as I know, they were pretty much welcomed. Uh, Milt Young wanted it in Grand Forks. I think that, yeah.
But the transfer shade was about 6,000 acres. That didn't exactly by money. Well, it's because the chamber of commerce.
All of the northern bases are basically in a straight line. You know, Grand Forks, Minot, and Great Falls. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes, that was a real gem. Is it still operating? I think so. Yes.
It's cultural, it's before the House Resolution Committee, we're talking around. And there's kind of this idea that governance, the authority of governance comes from the divine, it's God's resolution. And please don't misunderstand this. I am a man of deep faith. I'm also a man who lives in recovery, and my deep faith and my love of my creator and my relationship, personal relationship, is a big, huge part of my life. However, are you familiar with the kingship of Jesus Christ revolution?
I know about it, yeah, but I don't, I'm not qualified to talk about it. You know, whenever this issue comes up, I am compelled to remind people that there is not an established religion in the United States. And if there were, it would be Presbyterian. Other questions?
Out of the list. Been picked up for alcohol, using anti-racial, racist jokes, homophobic jokes, or curses that highly performing the victim. So there's,
He's not a Presbyterian.
I'm glad to give you some crack on.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Well,
you shouldn't be taken seriously.
well, but look, the reason that he gets elected is that he has a transient. But I need the constituency. You know, that part of the state. And remember, I'm from there. The Williams County election legislative district has shrunk appreciably, and virtually all of the people who live in that second district, not Williston itself, not the Williams County district, but the one kind of egg-shaped around to the west and north of Williston. It's all new people. I mean, I could have taken you there 10 years ago and we wouldn't have been able to see a house. Yes. In Sheridan County, Montana. No, Mother Bloor lived in and married a Montreal County farmer. You know, the ethnic history of Montreal County is really interesting. My favorite name, I went to school with a girl named Cleo Hukkinen, and she married Bill Bikinen. So her name is Cleo Hukkinen Bikinen. How much more Finnish can you get? And let's see, I'm 77, and I remember, I'm old enough to remember the Belden Town Hall. They flew the red flag at the Belden Town Hall into the 1950s, because we would drive past it, Dad and I, to go fishing in the Missouri and later in Lake Sakakawea. And he told me about the red flag and about Mother Bloor. Yes, it's a fascinating history, and the one you're referencing about Sheridan County, Montana, is fascinating too. They actually elected a government. That didn't happen in Montreal County. I joked with my siblings that when Dad died and we were going through his material, I said, I'm looking for the red card, but there wasn't one. He was a leaguer. He was a leaguer, but he was a Republican. Anything else? Anything else? Thank you so much.